Hello and welcome to the eOrganic webinar on Organic Certification of Research Sites and Facilities by Jim Riddle. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. We are a community of cooperative extension personnel, researchers, ag professionals, organic certifiers, and practitioners. You will be able to find the recording of this webinar, information about our upcoming webinars, as well as articles, videos, and more by going to our website at www.extension.org/organic_production. If you have a question for Jim at any time during the webinar, just type your question into the question box on your screen. It's to the right of the screen, and if the box is closed, just hit the little plus sign next to the word questions. We will be answering all the questions at the end of the presentation. We're very excited and privileged to have Jim Riddle as our speaker today. Jim has worked for over 26 years as an organic farmer, inspector, author, policy analyst, and educator. He was the founding chair of the IOIA, or International Organic Inspectors Association, and he co-authored the International Organic Inspection Manual. He has trained hundreds of organic inspectors throughout the world. Jim also served on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Organic Advisory Task Force from 1991 to 2009, and he was instrumental in the passage of Minnesota's landmark organic certification cost-share program. Since January 2006, Jim has worked as the University of Minnesota's Organic Outreach Coordinator. Jim is also the former chair of the USDA's National Organic Standards Board and is a leading voice for organic agriculture. I'm now going to turn things over to Jim. There may be a short pause.
Thanks, Alice, and thanks everyone for joining us. We've got a beautiful snowstorm going on here in Minnesota, and I think there's a lot of that happening around the country. I'm pleased today to talk about organic certification of research stations, sites, facilities. At the University of Minnesota, we have 3 different sites certified, one since the early 1990s. So we've had quite a bit of experience going through the certification process and now have a dairy herd under certification as well. And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and benefits of certifying a research station first, and then a little bit about the kind of certification process. I won't go into great detail about the standards. That's in other webinars. But I will talk about some of the research variances that could apply to your facility, and be happy to answer any questions as we come to the end, like Alice said. Well, what are some of the benefits and corresponding challenges of getting your research site certified? Well, number one, I think that's driving a lot of people to go that next step to get certified is it's a requirement for a number of the grant programs, the Organic Ag Research Extension Initiative, the USDA funds, also another USDA program, Organic Transitions, which last year focused on water quality in organic systems. But then also smaller non-government grants such as Organic Farming Research Foundation, Ceres Trust, or a grant program from Organic Valley, the farmers advocating for organic. All of them require that the research in organic systems be conducted on certified organic or land that's in transition to certified organic production. But also, you want your results of your research to be credible with the farmers, that you really, are the end users of a lot of the information, but also other researchers, the funders, and it shows that you're playing by the same rules, so to speak, that your research is conducted under a full organic system. It's not just take the chemicals away and call it organic research, but really implementing that organic system and then conducting research within that system gives a lot more credibility. A lot of people, a lot of researchers don't think about marketing the products of the research as certified organic, and that's a touchy topic, and it's a judgment call to make of whether you're in a position to be able to do that. But I know one of our research stations, we've been selling, grains, small grains, corn, beans, things like that on the organic market, and that allows then a full economic analysis that is also real life and improves the credibility, but also the integrated research from the soil all the way through to the marketing. And if it's like produce or things like that, you can have
Muted.
Of the researchers or the grad students or the student workers in marketing, so there's an additional educational component attached to it as well. And going through that certification process, you're educating other faculty, staff, students, farmers, extension educators on the standards, the certification process, how to complete an organic system plan, and systems thinking. So going through the exercise itself is quite valuable in kind of getting everybody up to speed on what the organic standards really mean. I mean, you can talk about them, you can read about them, but until you actually go through the certification process, they don't become real. You don't have to dig deep and really understand them and communicate with a certification agent about their meaning. Many schools now do have organic research stations or student organic farms, and it helps market the program. A lot of students these days are looking for universities, colleges with organic research, with organic programming, with classes in organic agriculture, or with student organic farms. So it's actually good for your university to help market the university and draw in students. But it also, getting certified and going through that process really helps you implement a quality system where there's mandatory documentation. Of course, you keep documentation on, your particular research questions, but when it's under certification, there has to be additional documentation to meet that certification requirement. And that brings some discipline. It helps keep records on a daily basis, not just of the experiment, but of how the system functions and how your operation complies with the standards. And having that inspector representing the certification agent come to your farm provides another set of eyes, an external evaluation of your research that, a lot of times you'll have an internal evaluation within your university, and then when you go to, submit papers, they go through a peer review and an external evaluation. But that's after the fact in many instances. And with certification, you submit that organic plan, the application form for review by the certification agency staff, and then an inspector makes an appointment, comes to your site, and goes through all the details about your operation, looks at the equipment, looks at the fields, the soil, the weed populations, how you're managing buffers, what kind of insect populations are present, looks at the seed sources you've used, the equipment that you use and how it's cleaned out, if it's used back and forth for organic and conventional research, and then where you store, how you handle the products coming off the research. So that, those set of eyes are a very valuable resource that you're bringing in. It's now, don't just think of it as somebody looking over your shoulder, but an additional resource person that can help identify what are called issues of concern, areas where you may not be in full compliance with the standards. And now I should just point out that during the organic inspection, the inspector doesn't make the decision. Gathers all the information, and then at the end of the inspection conducts an exit interview where the inspector talks about any additional information that you need to submit, but also any of the issues of concern that have been identified during the inspection so that you aren't blindsided later on. You know, that's what's going to go in the inspection report, but the certification agency people, the people in the office, are the ones who make that final decision, as I'll talk about a little bit later. But I just wanted to point that out, that inspector is a very valuable, or should be seen as a very valuable resource person. And then because you're getting certified, you really need to work together more as a team. The technicians, any student workers, as well as the faculty that are overseeing the research, and the grad students. It demands communication and coordination, things like cleaning out equipment or segregating products as they come off, or making sure the maps are in place and the field histories are accurate for those plots, and kind of the sequencing of when different activities are conducted, and of course the record keeping. That people work together and make sure they're completing their part in that record keeping system. Some other opportunities and challenges. Well, certification does open the door for more multidisciplinary opportunities, especially if you have certified organic products coming off of your land, and maybe you don't want to sell them into the market and compete with produce growers at the farmers market in your town or city, but still you can take those certified organic products on through to lab research in the food science department, for instance, and then they have access to certified organic products grown by your university that can be used for nutritional analysis or pesticide residue analysis or any number of types of food science questions. And also, if there are animals involved, if it's an integrated system where you're looking at the soils, the crops, and the livestock, that's really it's a very demanding area of research, but it becomes truly multidisciplinary at that point, and I think that we're going to see more and more of that funded in the future. But certainly the economics opportunities for economic research open up when you're producing certified organic products as well, as I mentioned earlier. If you are an organic operation, it does open doors for your research station to participate and gain experience with other government programs. There's no reason why an organic research station can't apply for and receive the organic certification cost share. You've paid for certification. You provide that proof of payment and your certificate to your State Department of Agriculture, and they have federal funds from the 2008 Farm Bill to pay you 75% of that certification fee back, up to $750 per operation per year. And that may not sound like a lot, but the real value I see, besides the dollars, is just you're going through some of the same experiences that the farmers who come to your field days are going through as well, and you're developing a relationship with the organic programming staff at your State Department of Agriculture. Now, a number of research stations also participate in conservation programming, so things like waterways or terraces or contour strips or wildlife habitat. Research stations, at least here in Minnesota, have historically gone to the NRCS for technical assistance in implementing conservation practices. And now the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, under their EQIP program, has an organic initiative to pay organic and transitioning producers a better rate of payment when they implement conservation practices on their land. So this is another area where you can collaborate with the federal agency, the NRCS, and gain real-life experience just like an organic farmer or a transitioning farmer down the road. There also now under EQIP is a high tunnel cost share in about 35 states. It's not in every state, but if your state's one of those and you're thinking about putting up a high tunnel or a hoop house for season extension research, you might want to check in with the NRCS office to see if something like that could fit at your research station. And if you do insure crops on the research site, that's another thing to look at, is working with the Risk Management Agency. They do have a classification for organic production, and there's various insurance packages now set up for organic producers. If you're doing certified organic research on your station and part of your research is working with area producers for on-farm research, that is a very good combination because you can design the same research methodologies on your station as on the certified organic farms that are your partners, and everybody's going to be on the same page. It helps identify problems and also solutions. But one thing I think that's probably underestimated is the more organic research that occurs at your station, the less exposure to toxics, less potential contamination, and less liability risk when you have student workers or technicians handling pesticides or anhydrous ammonia or whatever. With the organic system, there's less exposure to those kind of toxic risks. Some challenges. It's just if it's new, if your station hasn't done or your university hasn't conducted organic research, let alone certified organic research, there quite understandably is resistance. It's just not the way we've been doing things. And, you just have to work with that. Different people are more open-minded and will give a try, will be supportive, but it's something where it's probably best to not just come in and, force down someone's throat a wholesale change, but it's like, here's an opportunity, we have some funding or the opportunity for funding, and let's just start moving in this direction. And you certainly don't have to certify the entire site. You choose the land that goes in transition, that is seeking certification, so it's not a commitment of the entire station. But it may be seen as threatening by some of the conventional research partners and their funders, and you just have to work with that and find the administrative support for that. It may be difficult to have access to the land that's needed for long-term research. And most of the organic, it takes 3 years before the land qualifies for certification after the last application of a prohibited substance. So you've got to have either land that has been in, alfalfa or grass or something with with no prohibited materials. Well, then that can go into certified organic production quickly. But if it's been in straight conventional production research, then it does need to go through a full 3-year transition before it would qualify for certification. And then you're going to be looking at, most of this you want, at least 3, 5, 10-year research in the organic systems to get that soil biology, the ecology of the system fully functioning. And you want to make sure you're going to have access to that land it is a commitment, so the administration needs to be giving support for long-term use for organic research. They're also, an organic farmer typically will have buffers along the borders where their land adjoins conventional crops. On a research station, you're going to have, replicated plots and often smaller plots, and the issue of buffers is problematic, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's something to think through, is how can this be maintained organic and minimize risk of contamination from the adjoining land uses, even if those land uses are from your own activities on the research station. But also, the organic approach is a systems approach, and encouraging or establishing habitat for beneficial insects, birds, frogs, other amphibians, bats, all these kind of things are part of, organic production in a natural system. And this may be another area of running into resistance or not having access to land for habitat for beneficials. But that's something also to think through as you move in this direction. There may be a need for dedicated equipment. A lot of the equipment can go back and forth, but something like a sprayer that's used for applying prohibited substances on the conventional part of the research station is not going to be something that you're going to want to use on the organic side. I mean, it could be cleaned out and replace the hoses and nozzles and switch it over one time, but then it's dedicated for use on the organic side. But to think that it's going to be thoroughly cleaned, rinsed, and free of prohibited materials every time back and forth is just not realistic. So you need to think about that. I know for a lot of harvesting equipment, research equipment is set up for full clean out because that's important to not mix varieties or have commingling occurring. So that type of equipment is very well designed. But it's just another thing you need to do an assessment of your existing equipment inventory and what pieces can go back and forth without a whole lot of problem, just keeping records of whatever cleaning activity, and where do you need dedicated equipment because there is too large a contamination risk. Also, you will need, depends on the type of crop, of course, but if there's any storage involved, it would need to be clean and empty and dedicated, at least at that time, for organic, so there's no contamination or commingling during storage. It's an area, with new knowledge demands. Just, the organic standards require the use of organic seeds if they're commercially available in that equivalent variety in the form, quality, and quantity that's needed by your research project. Are you familiar with the suppliers of organic seeds? So you may or may not be, or the technicians you work with may or may not be. So there may be a need for just some new basic knowledge or how to produce transplants or seedlings. If you're growing crops that rely on annual seedlings, those need to be grown organically or purchased from organic sources. So you may have to convert the on-site greenhouse to organic as well in order to produce the organic seedlings for your field research. There's a number of approved fertility and pest management inputs that are used in organic systems and that are used really to supplement the natural system. And these may be new products that you and the rest of the staff are not familiar with, don't know where to go, don't know, who are the suppliers. And just one organization that does have a brand name list of approved inputs for crops, livestock, and processing in organic is the Organic Materials Review Institute, and their website is OMRI, OMRI.org. So, they don't market the products; they do reviews as a fee for service from the companies that want their products reviewed to make sure that they are compliant with the National Organic Program regulation. And then once they have been approved, the products themselves can carry on their label and on their advertising a claim OMRI listed, and they are listed in the OMRI, OMRI brand names list. So that's one source of information, but also attending organic conferences and just talking with the farmers you work with and with other researchers, certainly a good way to go. But you may also, with organic production, a critical component of successful production is the timing. And I know when you're doing research, it's not necessarily the same as a farmer, where the farmer's there 7 days a week and will be right on site and can get out when the soil conditions warrant, planting, cultivating, harvesting, whatever. That is more of a challenge with a research station, and to have realistic, credible results, you need to be operating it with the same attunement to timing as an organic farmer uses. So that certainly is always a challenge for organic research. You may not be the person driving the tractor, or they're student workers or technicians, and they need to be fully bought in as partners and be willing to come in on weekends if that's what it takes when the conditions are right to do the job that needs to be done. And then a challenge I have seen is kind of what I call farming by committee. Who makes the call? When do you say we need to get out there and plant, or run the roller crimper over the rye at a certain stage of maturity? I mean, there needs to be a responsible party, and that is true for certification as well. Is the inspector needs to be able to have access to the person who makes the decisions. So when you're seeking certification, be prepared. If you're the PI, you're the person in charge, to be there and answer questions, but to also have your team there, to have the technicians and the grad students and the other faculty there for the inspection. And the inspection does need to occur when the crops or facilities can be observed. So for crop, it's during the growing season. For livestock, it could be any time of year unless you're also certifying the feed, and then it's going to be during the time of year when the feed can be observed in the field. Now, a few words about organic certification just in general. It's conducted by an accredited certifying agent. Those are regulated by USDA. There are about 100 currently accredited by USDA. Some are state government programs, some are nonprofit associations, and some are for-profit companies. About 55 of them are located in the U.S., about 45 outside of our borders. But under the eyes of the USDA, all accredited certifiers are equal. They have the competency, the freedom of conflict of interest, the financial stability, the in-house expertise to be able to conduct organic certifications on behalf of the USDA. And that is to the NOP regulation, the National Organic Program regulation. And a certifier can be accredited for crops, wild crops, livestock, and or handlers certification. And handler is synonymous with processors. So if you're, doing crops and livestock and handling, you want to make sure you choose an accredited certifier who is competent in all of those areas. If you're just doing crops, Well, some certifiers just focus on crops, but when you're contacting certifiers, I encourage you to make sure that they have the accreditation in the area of production that you are conducting your research in. Don't find that out a little. That would come up, but it's a good question to ask. Make sure that they have that accreditation. And that is the website for the USDA National Organic Program. You can find a list of all accredited certifiers at that site. You can also download the regulation if you don't already have that from that site, and find out about the approved materials that can be used on organic farms and other proposed changes to the regulation and that kind of thing. It's the official, government site. Just a brief overview of the organic certification process. That transition is really 36 months from the last application of a prohibited material before the harvest of the first organic crop could be certified. So you need to keep records on those plots of when the last application of prohibited material, what it was, what the date was, and then what's the field history, what other crops, what other inputs have been used since that time. And during that transition process, you should be contacting different certifiers, and it's good to work with a certifier in your region, and someone who you establish rapport, someone who the on-farm research, farmers have good things to say about, but do a little checking around, go to some organic conferences. A lot of times the certifiers will have booths, get copies of their paperwork, give them a call and see if they return your call in a timely manner or answer your questions, and go from there. But also during this transition, you should be setting up your record-keeping system, that certifiable audit trail, as I say in the flow chart. But really, you're doing all these things on your own as you're writing grants. We're in transition. You're not yet being inspected or supervised, so to speak, until you complete an organic system plan, which is the application form. They're typically 14 to 15 pages long. Ask lots of questions about your land, the field history, the fertility management, the sources of seeds, your pest and disease management, with the types of equipment are on site. They're going to want maps of the plots. But anyway, you pull all that together, the organic system plan, and submit that along with the fees. And the certifiers must make their fees publicly available to you so you know in advance what it will cost, submitting that to the certification agent's office. They'll review it there and make sure that it's complete. Oftentimes they, get back to you and say, oh, I can't understand what you said on page 3, or we need some labels, or we need a little more information from you. That's not uncommon. That it shows that they did a thorough review. They also look it over to see if your operation appears to have the ability to comply. If you applied Roundup last year, they're going to call you and say, sorry, your land is not ready yet. And you might say, we understand that, but we would like to be inspected anyway, just so we have another set of eyes and while we're going through transition. That's possible, and that's not going to be held against you. But you should know that that land would not qualify for certification in that year that you've submitted the application. These applications are typically submitted, though, in that third year of transition, and usually early in the year, say March, April, so that the certifier has some time to review it, to get it to an inspector, to conduct the inspection, to answer any additional questions, and actually issue your certification sometime during the growing season. But you can't wait till midway through the growing season and expect to get certified realistically, that very year at the drop of a hat. It does take, 3 months or so anyway, so you need to plan for that. Now, once you've submitted that organic plan and your fees, and there's been that review, then the certifier will turn the paperwork over to an organic inspector. And that inspector may be a staff inspector or may be an independent contractor. That inspector then will contact you and set up an appointment. And like I said, the inspection needs to occur during the growing season when the crops can be observed or the livestock can be observed, and when the person responsible for the operation is available. And it typically, inspection takes 3 hours for crops, 5 hours for livestock operation. And with research, it can take even longer. Just there's more factors and some limitations and more replication, often more records to review. But anyway, set aside that amount, the necessary amount of time. Turn off your cell phone. Don't turn off your computer because you might need to call up some records, but make yourself available uninterrupted to focus on the inspection. It'll only take 3 hours, and then the inspector will be gone. But if you have continuous interruptions, it can take a lot longer and be much more frustrating for everyone involved. So I encourage you to dedicate the amount of time and attention to the inspection. Like I said, the inspector doesn't make the decision. They file a report. They're more like a journalist. They're there capturing your story and telling your story in a written report to the certifier. And they do identify issues of concern and what standard in the NOP is applicable to that concern. That information all goes to the certifier, who goes through the report, goes back through your organic plan, looks at the standards, and determines whether or not your operation is certified. And I just always like to read the definition in the NOP of organic production, because a lot of people, I still hear it, oh, there's 1,000 definitions of organic production. Well, no, under the Code of Federal Regulations, there's one, and that is a production system. So a systems approach, like I've been talking about, that's managed to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. So as you're entering certified organic production, this is the framework that you're operating under. It's not, like I said, just stopping the chemicals, but it is an ecological management system that conserves biodiversity and recycles nutrients and resources. And that organic system plan is mandatory, where you describe the proactive strategies that you use to prevent problems. It's not just a list of inputs, but it does include all the inputs you use and plan to use, and the practices that you plan to use. But it's really important that when you fill out that organic plan, that you're realistic, that you say exactly what you're doing and what you plan to do, because you're obligated to follow your own plan. You're also obligated to follow the organic standards. But if you change from your plan, you are required to notify your certifier of these changes, and they'll determine whether another inspection is needed, or if you can just send in photos or fax in some additional records, or what the changes are. It all depends on the extent of the changes. But anytime you make a change that could affect the organic status, you need to contact the certifier. You can only use approved substances, so if something is natural, you typically can use it unless it's prohibited, on the national list of allowed and prohibited substances. If it's a synthetic substance, it's typically prohibited unless it's on that national list as an allowed synthetic. So there are limits on the type of substances, and of course you have to pay those fees and then go through an annual inspection each year. Now, and I'm not going to go further into the standards today. I did that in a webinar 2 weeks ago called the ABCs of Organic Certification, which is on the extension.org website. So if you'd like to review that, I invite you to do that, or look at some of the other articles and publications that we have on the extension.org site. But I did want to touch on the issue of temporary variances. Certain section 205.209 of the NOP rule allows for temporary variances. They have to be established by the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service Administrator. Those are things like natural disasters, drought, etc. But also it has a clause that says practices used for the purpose of conducting research or trials of techniques, varieties, or ingredients used in organic production or handling. So here is an opportunity that if you are thinking about doing some things that, you know, might not normally fit in an organic system, can you get a temporary variance? So I'd like to talk about how that occurs and what some of the limitations are. First, you would make that request to the certifying agent, either prior to certification as part of your research plan, or while you're certified and like next year we want to try something different and we would like a temporary variance for the next 3 years for this type of research. Well, you of course have to describe what it is and then present that to the certifier, and the certifier can't just say yes. The certifier has to, if they agree and support and fully understand and think that it fits in the realm of what's possible under a temporary variance, they would then request that or recommend that it be granted by the Ag Marketing Service Administrator. And then the administrator, if all goes well, would establish the variance and set a period of time when it's allowed. And the administrator can grant an extension to that. I have to take a drink here just a moment. So first I'll just talk about some of the things that are not allowed. That section 205-290 lists a bunch of section numbers that can be considered. But some of the ones that are not listed there, specifically, temporary variances will not be granted for any practice or material or procedure that's prohibited under section 205-105. So those are things like any non-approved synthetic substances. So prohibited materials would not be considered as allowable for a temporary variance. Or using a prohibited natural substance. So something like tobacco dust or strychnine or arsenic, those are natural, but they're on the list as prohibited natural substances. Those couldn't be considered. Any use of an excluded method, and that's a code word for genetically engineered organisms, those would not be allowed for consideration, nor would any use of ionizing radiation or sewage sludge based fertilizers. So those are out as far as being considered for a temporary variance. And I did just want to run through the definition of excluded method, just so you're clear that it's a variety of methods used to genetically modify organisms or influence their growth or development by means that are not possible under natural conditions or processes and are not considered compatible with organic production. Such methods include, and this is important, the types of Modifications not allowed include cell fusion, microencapsulation and macroencapsulation, and recombinant DNA technology, including gene deletion, gene doubling, introducing a foreign gene, and changing the position of genes when achieved by recombinant DNA technology. However, such methods do not include the use of traditional breeding, conjugation, fermentation, hybridization, in vitro fertilization, or tissue culture. So that's kind of sets a framework of what could be considered of breeding techniques and what is considered an excluded method and therefore not allowed. So what are some of the things that are eligible for consideration for a temporary variance? The Soil Fertility and Crop Nutrient Practice Standard, 203. So anything in that, you could seek a variance and change from that, as long as it's not using a prohibited material. The requirements for seeds and planting stock. The crop rotation standard, 205.205. Say you wanted to do some side-by-side, one with really soil building crop rotation that complies next to a soil depleting rotation. You could do that and still be certified if you're doing it under a temporary variance. The pest, weed, and disease management standard has a lot of opportunities for consideration there. The wild crop harvesting standard, it's hard to imagine that that would be used on a research site. But the origin of livestock, feed, healthcare, and living conditions. When you're doing livestock research, there's quite a bit of flexibility there. The basic processing or handling requirements, the facility pest management standard, and prevention of commingling or contact with prohibited substances in a processing environment. So there's a fair number of the standards that could be considered for a temporary variance. But you still need to keep records, still need to maintain or improve the natural resources of the operation, still need to fill out an organic system plan, not use prohibited materials, go through that transition, no prohibited materials 3 years prior to organic harvest, have distinct defined boundaries and buffer zones, follow the proper labeling requirements, and get certified following the certification procedures that are detailed in Section 205-400. So I'll just close here with a couple examples of potential variances that could be considered. So here's the Section 203C2 establishes certain requirements for the production of compost. That's in the realm that could be considered for a temporary variance. So a researcher could request a variance to produce compost on a certified organic research station through methods or parameters other than those that are specified in the compost section of the regulation. So if you're designing some new experimental composting methods that don't quite match up with the prescriptive language in the rule, that would be a fair game to request a temporary variance. Or, okay, I already mentioned this, if you wanted to show the soil building benefits of a really good crop rotation by contrasting it with a depleting or a not advanced crop rotation, that can still be done under an organic system as part of a research project. And one for livestock is the standard prohibits organic livestock from being moved to a non-organic operation and then back to organic. And normally such animals would lose their organic certification. However, a variance could be requested so that animals could be rotated between the organic and non-organic portions of a research station, say if they're going into the non-organic portion for taking blood samples or doing various health tests, capturing data, or assessing their behavior. So that would be something where there could be a reasonable request for a temporary variance. So I'll just close here with the website of the National Organic Program back up, as well as the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, which is mosesorganic.org, and they have an 800 number to help answer questions you might have. So does ATRA, the Appropriate Technology Transfer to Rural Areas, and they also have lots of very good resources on their website. They have workbooks that you can download that are all based on the regulation, and you can conduct kind of a self-assessment of your site, and it has questions, yes/no questions that go through the entire standards so that you can determine what you need to change on your own before you even contact the certifier. I'm not going to say what all of those others are, but of course, down third line from the bottom, eOrganic.info and extension.org are the ones who are bringing you this webinar and catalog webinars, and have hundreds of articles and a YouTube channel for organic agriculture information. And then the website I manage for the University of Minnesota, organicecology.umn.edu. And we just recently have a new article where I've analyzed the National Ag Statistics Service organic production survey that was released late last week. We also have information there, a new report about our organic high tunnel research. So I invite you to visit that site and see some of the things that we're up to. With that, let's see if there are any questions. Alice, are you there?
Yes, I am. I just unmuted myself. Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
And I'd like to repeat for any listeners who might have missed the beginning of this webinar that if you have a question for Jim, you can type it into the question box to the right of your screen and hit return. If you can't see your question box, there's a small plus sign next to the word question, and you can go over to it and open it up, and you should be able to see the question box. So let's see. I'm going to just see if I can open up the question box to get a better look at this question. Just give me 1 second here.
All right.
Okay, here we go. As far as I know, there are no organic standards for aquaponics, correct me if I'm wrong, which are basically operated organically since fish are susceptible to chemicals. Is that in the pipeline?
Well, yeah, question of hydroponics or aquaponics. Typically organic has been a soil-based standard, and so much of the standard talks about, maintaining the fertility, the health, the quality of the soil, and soil-building rotations, etc. And the National Organic Standards Board, who really provides input to the USDA on standards and approved materials, has looked at hydroponics and so far has not issued any draft recommendations for complete standards for organic hydroponics. And, I have mixed feelings about it. I certainly, want to see hydroponics done with minimal reliance on synthetic and toxic inputs, but at the same time, I don't know that organic is fully a compatible label because it is so much based on the ecology of nature, of the system that it functions in. So it's an ongoing discussion and debate.
Okay, we have another question, which is how many research stations are certified to date?
Good question, and I don't know the answer to that. The Organic Farming Research Foundation, OFRF, has done state-of-the-state surveys of various colleges and universities, but it's been a while since their latest report came out. But you might check their website. They're the nonprofit organization that really keeps track of what's happening at our universities as far as organic research. I'd love to see, and that's something that if they don't have, eOrganic should start compiling a list of. So good question.
Okay, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to type them into the question box. I had one question before the webinar, which was, can you use prohibited substances as part of a research experiment if it's critical to the research? And I mean, from what you said, Jim, it sounded like the answer was no.
Well, right, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen at that research station. But it's just the plots where the prohibited substances are being used would not be certified. They would not be part of the organic plan. They would be described in the research plan that should be submitted as an addendum to the organic plan. And in every other way, those plots should be managed organically so that, to reduce any variables. And they're, being done in the same soil type, the same climate, the same, water conditions, etc. But those plots themselves and the products coming off of those plots would not qualify for organic certification. But, if you do that, you need to, think through the, buffers between the plots. That might be something where you could get a variance so that it's not, the same as the border of a farm field where someone's producing an organic crop. There might be some allowance for, just walkways or very narrow buffers just to make sure that none of the prohibited materials being directly applied on the organic. So that would be one variance that would apply, but the prohibited substance itself would not qualify.
Okay, thank you. We had one follow-up comment from the questioner who asked about aquaponics, who said that the aquaponics can employ small ponds or community ponds wherein the processors are integrated and very much part of the outdoors. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if it's a polyculture type with aquaculture, fish, and possibly hydrologic plants. I guess I was thinking more of just hydroponics, where it's just switching from a synthetic fertilizer recipe over to one using approved materials. But now I understand the question is more about an integrated polyculture with possibly fish or other aquatic organisms, and then the water being used in production of crops, either in the soil or some kind of growing medium. And that, I think, is much more in line with organic principles, and I would love to see that be considered. And to make appeals and draft standards presented to the National Organic Standards Board for their consideration. And setting some limits, or what type of aquatic polyculture system is truly compatible with that definition of organic production that I read, and which types are not. Because right now, I'm afraid there are operations that are making organic claims that really are just, switching to approved inputs, but not complying with the full set of ecological standards that are contained in the regulation.
Yeah, she posted another comment which said that aquaponics is the production of fish and crops in the same system.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, well, if anybody else has any more questions, feel free to type them in. And if not, I want to thank you all for joining us in this webinar. And if there's anything that you missed or you'd like to hear again, the webinar is being recorded, and it will be available along with all the slides on the eOrganic website at http://www.extension.org/organic_production. And on that website, you can also find out about our upcoming webinars. Jim Riddle is going to be presenting another webinar for eOrganic on February 23rd on the Equip Organic Initiative. and that way people can take advantage of the deadline for applying to that. I don't know if you want to talk about that for a second, Jim. But also, I wanted to mention that on March 2nd, there's another webinar on high tunnel production and low-cost tunnel construction.
Yeah, well, I hope that people join in for both of those. It's very exciting that the Natural Resource Conservation Service does have funds under their eQuip program to help organic and transitioning farmers implement conservation practices. So we'll be talking about the new rules for this sign-up. It's open right now through March 12th, so we'll be having the webinar while the sign-up period is still open, and encouraging people to go to their local NRCS office and inquire about the eQuip Organic Initiative or the eQuip High Tunnel Cost Share Program that's available in about 35 states.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us.
And thank you, Alice.
Okay.